The top business stories live from the Sky newsroom. India Prime Minister Narendra Modi visits the UK to sign a landmark free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Lloyds Banking Group reports higher than expected pre-tax profits, but warns the Chancellor against raising taxes on the financial services sector.
We are the leading or the biggest taxpayer in the UK as Lloyds Banking Group, and that's something we take a huge amount of pride in. But actually the UK financial services sector is one of the highest taxed sectors in the world.
Plus, over a quarter of mothers on maternity leave do not return to work. We'll try and answer why and what it means for the UK's economy. Very good morning on this Thursday Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, in the last hour or so, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in the UK signing that landmark free trade agreement with our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. The trade deal was agreed earlier this year and will now be formally signed. It's the biggest agreement between the United Kingdom since we left the European Union. Well, join me now is Ali Renison, Director of SEC Newgate and a former policy advisor to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, who worked on this trade agreement. And it was smiles all around this morning, wasn't it? And to be fair, you know what? They have managed to get this deal over the line.
They have, and I think one of the important things to remember is that India has a really, really high average sort of cost of tariff and non-tariff barriers to enter its market. So, you know, we don't always see free trade agreements that can really move the dial on trade. This is definitely one of them.
And it is because, as you say, the entry point has been quite a protectionist, closed economy, hasn't it, India, for quite a long period of time. But just talk us through the details of what this will actually mean for different sectors of the UK economy.
Yeah, so overall, I think the average weighted tariff that it has was going down from about 15% to 3%. Now, there's huge variations above that. So if you look at some of the sectors like whiskey, 150% average tariff to get into that market, autos, about 110%. Those are being reduced down to 10% over time for the auto sector, and also to about 40% over a couple of years for the whiskey sector. So I think particularly in the goods space, we're seeing a huge amount of tariff reductions in some key areas.
Yeah, and as you say, that's particularly important for something like the whiskey industry, which is, I think, 20% of our food and drink exports here in the UK. What about the concerns? What have we had to give away, Ali, to do this? I mean, you look at, obviously, the Australia-New Zealand deal, and there was a lot of concern amongst farmers about the impact it could have there. What have we traded here in our compromise to get this deal with India?
Well, interestingly, I think the agricultural sector in the UK doesn't have the same sensitivities with this one. For example, we actually are going to be exporting duty-free quite quickly once it comes into force, lamb down from 33%. Now, some of the sensitivities in the agricultural sector were perhaps around rice and sugar. Those have effectively been excluded from the deal, so those concerns are dealt with. I think if you look at it from a sort of a win-win perspective, rather than a kind of who's winning and who's losing, actually one of the key things for India was easier access for its textile and sort of shoe apparel sort of sector into the UK. Now, keep in mind that, you know, Indian linen doesn't really going to displace Harris tweed. So the difference in what things are being produced for each market means that actually that's a big inbound benefit to reduce the cost of clothing in the UK.
And what about the public sector? Because India obviously is the most populous nation on the planet. It's a very federalised system. So we've got obviously big state governments. Can the UK effectively, as a state, help enter that market in terms of procurement, advice? Is that part of the deal as well?
It is, and I think that's one of the things that makes this free trade agreement that India has done quite different from some of its other ones in terms of the breadth and the scope and the depth of some of its commitments in areas like access to public procurement. It's a very, very closed market. So in the non-sensitive sectors, British firms will be able to bid for contracts across the piece. Now, I think it's important to say that we need to make sure that India does abide by its commitments. But the important thing of having a trade agreement is that you have a lever to pull if you feel that you're being discriminated against.
Ali, we really appreciate your insight this morning, live from Dundee. That's Ali Renison. Thank you. And we'll have more on this trade deal, speaking to some of the businesses involved in this a little later on in the programme. But let's turn to banking now, because Lloyds has reported that its pre-tax profits rose by 31% in the 3 months to June compared with the previous quarter, beating analysts' expectations. The Chief Executive, Charlie Nunn, has urged the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, not to see the surge in profits as an opportunity to raise taxes on the financial services sector or risk damaging hopes of economic growth. Well, earlier I had a chance to speak to Charlie Nunn, and I began by asking him what was behind Lloyds' positive figures this morning.
Well, we announced a strategy at the start of 2022, which was to pivot back to growth, to focus on our core businesses, to win market share in some key businesses, and then to drive improvements in our operating leverages, so productivity and use of capital. And those things are delivering. So the 6% growth in revenues year on year is linked to us winning market share in mortgages, in SME lending, in some of our corporate infrastructure investments, transition finance, pensions. Those things are working. And I think the other operating income line growing 9% again, quarter on quarter, year on year, really indicates that strategy working. So, we see a robust economy that is constructive for us, and I can talk more about that, but actually our strategy is working.
Talking about the robust economy, customer deposits are up, savings effectively up, aren't they, by 2%, £11.2 billion. Are we being too harsh on the British economy? Are we being doomsters, if you like, that actually, in some metrics, things are pretty robust still?
Yeah, that's our core belief. Now, look, there's lots of uncertainty in the world, and I know you talk about that a lot on this important programme. And when we look at our forecasts, the formal forecasts we've laid for this year, I'd describe it as a very resilient but slower growth economy. 1% GDP is the forecast we have for this year. Underlying that, though, when we look at households and businesses, small and large specifically, actually the financial resilience and the health of those areas overall is improving and actually quite strong relative to history. So what we see is a real opportunity to go to the next level of growth. If we can get confidence, we can get the right investment, and we can get the right policy programme. Just one proof point, savings and deposits for UK households has actually increased about 6% year on year, so obviously significantly above inflation. And we're seeing that business cash flows in the SME sector has been strengthening every month this year. So look, there's real opportunity for us to get to the next level of growth, but we're not there yet.
Charlie, talk to me about mortgages. A lot of people have got a mortgage with Lloyds. There's an expectation of a Bank of England rate cut next month. What's your sense of where we go beyond that, though? Rates not expected, in your measurement, to fall as much as we would have thought merely earlier on this year?
So our forecast for rates is actually 2 more rate cuts this year, and then over 2026 coming down to about 3.5%. We do think rates will be longer in the medium term, just given the nature of what's going on in the world, the uncertainty, and then the level of government debt. But we see rates falling, and a little bit faster this quarter than we did last quarter. For the mortgage market, it's been a pretty healthy mortgage market. So you'll have seen in our results, we grew our net mortgages in the first half over £5 billion. We helped 34,000 first-time buyers in the first half alone, 64,000 last year. And of course, it was driven by the stamp duty changes in Q1. So Q2 was a bit slower, but we continue to see real strength in customers wanting to buy homes and take mortgages. So we think that'll continue. The underlying growth that we saw in the first half will continue as we look into the second half with some strength. And then house prices, we're predicting a kind of 2 to 3% increase in house prices. It's obviously been a bit softer in the last month or two over the summer, but we think overall this year, a constructive mortgage and house market for us to lean into.
You were a little bit critical of this government, I think, leading up to Rachel Reeves' Mansion House speech, I think, comparing at one stage some of the actions to communist China, particularly around pensions. What did you think of the Chancellor's speech? Have you kind of somewhat reassessed maybe what the government are doing?
Oh, look, we welcomed the government and the Chancellor's speech. At the heart of it, and we've been very aligned with this for a while, is the belief that a strong economy needs a strong financial system. Obviously, the pensions is one very specific issue, but when you look more broadly, that's absolutely our belief that the financial services sector by itself is an important sector. But most importantly, we can do a lot more to leaning into helping housing and infrastructure and small business scaling, large businesses investing and international investors investing in the UK. That's our core business. So we really welcome the Mansion House reforms. If you think about it, it's the first time we've seen that kind of a package and that mindset to ask for regulation to support the real economy since the financial crisis. And that belief that a strong economy needs a strong financial system is right at the heart of what we do and our purpose statement of helping Britain prosper.
Into that, I mean, one of my colleagues, Will Frost, talked to the head of Goldman Sachs this week, saying that he thought that London's position, the kind of apex position, is pretty precarious at the moment. Are you concerned about London's role now in the world as a financial centre, which has been kind of slipping away a little bit, hasn't it, over the last couple of years?
Look, as you said, financial services is, I think, one of the most, if not the most competitive industry in the world, especially when you look across geographies and the way it operates. And at the heart of that, we've had a leading sector in the UK for now, obviously, a number of decades. And it is a very hard thing to keep right at the forefront of global competitiveness, which is why I come back to actually the Mansion House, but also, more importantly, the intent of what we've seen through this government and actually the previous government to try and readjust about the competitiveness and growth of the sector. We really do need to look at what's happening internationally. The reforms that we can see in the US, in Europe, are moving really, really fast. And so we need to do everything we can to make sure that financial services can support the real economy even better in the UK, and as a sector in its own right, compete. And I think there's more to do.
OK, just two final quick questions, if I can, Charlie. First of all, on non-DOMs, I mean, there's been lots of talk about people leaving the country, moving elsewhere, particularly to the Middle East. What's your experience of that? Is it being overblown, or genuinely are a lot of wealthy people looking at their position here in the UK?
Look, we're not the best business to really answer that question. We have much more of a broad-based customer base, so we've not been really focused on the non-DOM issue. If I just think about tax more broadly, especially for financial services, as we were just discussing, as you know, we are the leading or the biggest taxpayer in the UK as Lloyds Banking Group, and that's something we take a huge amount of pride in. But actually, the UK financial services sector is one of the highest taxed sectors in the world. So when you think of that on a relative basis about how people are going to invest in the City of London and how then we can support the real economy, that is one of the things that we think is important to note.
OK, and just very finally on that point about the real economy and about kind of our macroeconomic situation, do you think this government's been radical enough? I mean, you look at our national debt, you look at productivity, you look at anemic economic growth. I mean, there are so many structural challenges on there to the UK economy. Do you want the government to be kind of bolder and braver in being, as I say, more radical to try and fix some of those problems?
So I think the way you teed the question is perfect. Look, this is a 20-year problem. As you know, productivity has been a challenge, and there is no single silver bullet around getting productivity growing. And of course, at the heart of productivity is going to be really empowering households, businesses, SMEs, and international investment. So it's a broad-based set of interventions. If you look at what the government's done, we really welcome a lot of the focus on, for the first time now in a few decades, leaning into some of the biggest changes or shifts we need. So sorting out the housing problem, which will be the bedrock for enabling skills and productivity and growth, leaning into the energy and making sure energy is cheaper for manufacturing and industry in the UK, facing into some of the big infrastructure and transport projects. We think these things are really important, and they're pretty bold. But a bit like my last theme, we need to move fast as an economy. We as the private sector, financial services, and all of the SMEs and businesses across the UK have to really lean into making the changes happen. And when we look at the opportunity around AI, I think there really is a significant opportunity in the next 5 years to kind of join up that longer-term set of investments the government's really facilitated and get that vibrant innovation and entrepreneurship going in the UK. And that's what we need to focus on, leveraging some of the new technologies, AI, and getting SMEs and businesses to drive the productivity and build the confidence of consumers. And as I said, consumers have the capacity to drive more demand, and that's what we need to focus on.
That's the head of Lloyds there, Charlie Nunn, speaking to me a little earlier. Now, over a quarter of mothers on maternity leave do not return to work or leave the roles within a year. That's according to new research by the maternity coaching provider at Maternity. Most women surveyed said poor return to working or parenting policies had impacted their decision. Well, delighted to say it, we can speak to the chief executive of Maternity, that is Sophie Maunder. Sophie, very good morning to you. And this is a real issue, isn't it? That, it's clearly affecting millions of mothers, that big decision. about the balance of whether it is right, whether it's even financially viable sometimes to go back to work.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely true. There are many reasons why a woman may decide that she can't return to work. And I think the truth of the matter is that what we heard in this research, which was so stunning to us, was that 2/3 of those women that choose not to come back to work or say that they felt they had to leave within a year actually cite poor parenting policies or lack of support at work. And it's those parents really that, it's such a shame for the businesses. They've got invested in talent. They've got great talent there that they've had for many years, and they've got women who've invested in their careers. And yet women want to keep their jobs, but they actually say they felt they weren't able to keep their jobs because there was just that lack of support when they tried to return. And that is a real shame for businesses because there's a huge cost for businesses. And we've done the maths now. We've understood this really important figure of £650 million a year is wasted by British businesses who are having to re-recruit against those job roles that women didn't want to leave and businesses didn't want to lose. And that's just a crying shame. It's lose-lose for everyone.
And Sophie, from my own personal experience, knowing young mothers, a lot of this seems to be around flexibility. A friend of mine kind of effectively doesn't want to go back to the office 5 days a week, has suggested 3. The employers said no, and they're now thinking about leaving. It's circumstances like that crop up all the time.
That's absolutely right. But mothers are not asking for the world. They want to keep their careers. They want to keep their career aspirations high. They just want to come back and for it to be understood that they might need a bit of time to transition back to that and work out how it works. Mothers tell us all the time it takes between 3 to 6 months to make that transition from working person to working parent and understand how that works. And during that time, there's a huge amount of changes that go on in this transitionary period. They just want that support to understand what flexibility do they need to keep their career ambitions high, but actually, be able to do those caring responsibilities that they have to do. This is not a choice. This is something that they want to do both things, and it should work if companies can give them a bit of time to get used to it. Parenting is clearly a long game, as we know. But there is this really pivotal transitional moment where if we could just give women support and get them back, we just know that they're more likely to stay and have fulfilling careers.
And just very funny on this, Sophie, we've also talked a lot about demographic decline and the economic challenges that might kind of prove. Is the research suggesting that actually the inflexibility, the possibility of disrupting work, leaving your job, is actually preventing women from having babies in the first place?
Well, there is definitely an argument to say that the demographics are changing on that. But, what I'm heartened to see is that the government, as we know, are doing a full parental review. Now, they've just recently announced that they will do a parental review, both in maternity and paternity leave. And I think if we can get that balance better and get that balance right between paternity and shared parental leave, then we'll really see people feeling more able to make that balance work, to commit to both jobs and being a working parent. 80% of us are going to be working parents at some point in our lives. This is not an unusual chapter of life, and we just need to accept that as businesses and try and support people so they feel able to have families and have the families they want and yet have the careers they want too.
OK, Sophie, we really appreciate your time this morning from Maternity there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll have more on that landmark free trade agreement with India. We're speaking to a distillery in Scotland hoping to export more than the world's 4th largest economy.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Very welcome back to Business Live. Returning to our top story now, that £4.8 billion trade deal between India and the United Kingdom. We've got some pictures, I think, that's just come into us of a meeting between Sir Keir Starmer and Narendra Modi, hugging there outside, a little uncomfortably, it must be said, outside Chequers. As part of this free trade agreement, Narendra Modi is in the UK today to officially sign that deal, if you like. It's been described as landmark, as historic, certainly the most significant deal that the UK has signed since we left the European Union. Well, let's bring in Nishant Sharma. He's the founder of Rutland Square Spirits in Edinburgh and joins me live now. Very good morning to you. Just first of all, your sense of what this deal means, not just, I think, for the whisky industry in Scotland, but indeed for relations between the UK and India.
Definitely, this is a landmark deal, not only for spirit sector, but for every single business that will be impacted through the deal. India has been a closed economy for centuries. It's first time ever this free trade agreement will open up the economy, one of the biggest populations in the world, growing consumer market, which will impact everyone at home in the UK, especially in Scotland.
Well, I was going to say, talk to me about your spirits business. I read that it's a Scottish spirit with Indian soul.
Yes, it is. It's the world's first and only oolong white tea infused chai spice gin and rum. We are creating exciting spirits here in Edinburgh. It's led by a white tea that we grow on our small farm in a small town in Dibrugarh in Assam in India. I was born and bred in India, but I've been living in Scotland for over 18 years. So it's a bridge between East and West. It's an immigrant story. Scotland has been home. It's where I have lived and where I have my kids and family. So I bring the tea. We fill it with 13 locally sourced botanicals. We create one of the most exciting gins that's out there in the market, and now rum.
And the reason this all matters, of course, is because India, obviously the most populous nation on the planet, is a massive market for the whisky and spirits industry, and tariffs have been historically very high.
Correct. So 150% import duty on alcohol has been forever. With this trade agreement, the duty will come down 5% every year, starting from 75%, starting once the deal signed. Prime Minister Modi is here to put pen to paper. It will not only boost the alcohol industry. India has huge demands, especially after the trade agreement. The demand has surged. Indians love Scotch. They are very passionate about Scotch, and now they are looking to welcome more exciting boutique products like ourselves into India in a more reasonable price, which will be accessible to the wider population.
Yeah, it really is. And this is, as I say, a real moment in many ways, just briefly, between the UK and India, isn't it?
Correct. India and UK have history. My family, let alone, has history with Scotland. Back in the day when India and UK were together, a Scotsman taught my great-grandfather how to distill. So this is how we come to Scotland, and I came to Scotland. The bridge had always existed. It's become stronger.
Yeah.
There is...
and can I just briefly ask, what does a Scotsman who's from India, who do they support in the cricket? England or India?
It's a tricky one. If it's Scotland's playing, then I'm supporting Scotland. We are sponsoring cricket this year for the last match, so it will be whoever is winning. Okay, perfect stuff. Nishant, thank you very much indeed. That's it from me on Business Live. We're back at 4:30.